In the command center aboard the Jellyfish, the air was thick with tension. Initial reports from Squadron Leader Inirka of the second wave began to filter in through the radio operators. 2 airships struck in the initial volley. Damage is significant. Fires on board. Both may be considered combat ineffective. 2 shards lost. 1 chute confirmed. 1 unconfirmed. Taking over overwatch duties from Wave 1. Squadron Leader Tern confirms her intent to return for refuel and rearmament, with 1 local element craft. William listened intently as Captain Nornhell acknowledged the report. Things were going well, or at least as well as could be expected under the circumstances. With this latest update, he was officially down a quarter of his 40-strong shard complement. Meanwhile, the enemy's shard presence had been reduced to just 2 craft, which were currently being hunted down. By any measure, this was a win. His Corsairs had performed admirably, especially considering the disparity in experience between his pilots and the enemies, not to mention the rushed nature of this deployment. He hadn't planned for his pilots' first experience with the new Corsair C to be in live combat, but here they were. He knew this would be little comfort to the families who would soon receive their daughters in coffins, but he had made peace with that reality long ago. No, this was a success, albeit under less than ideal conditions. Please congratulate Squadron Leader Tern on her success, William said quietly to the woman beside him, and remind her of the importance of the local element's safety on the return flight. His heart had leapt into his throat when he'd heard reports of a craft resembling the basilisk circling the city. Fortunately, the Corsair CS, though not in need of such measures, were equipped with signaling flags. A brief exchange had ensued, and the basilisk had been folded into the returning formation. The woman saluted and relayed his orders to the captain. It felt a bit silly, given they were only 5 feet apart, but protocol was protocol, especially in a combat environment. William couldn't afford to distract the captain with constant orders. Glancing back, he noticed Alzina, Marlene, and Verity whispering heatedly in a corner of the bridge. Alzina had been temporarily relieved of her duties as his go-between after their recent discussion. He approached them, his tone calm but firm. "My apologies for the interruption. You were saying something earlier?" Alzina smirked. "Mostly that I knew it. I knew there was no way you could keep pulling new tricks out of thin air without being harrowed." William chuckled. "And you're not concerned about my mental state? My future plans?" The high elf scoffed. "You say that like it's something new. I already thought you were crazier than squirrel shit. This just explains why." Marlene nodded slowly. "It does shed light on your more peculiar behaviors. Though I must admit, I'm more curious about why you're not completely insane." William opened his mouth to respond, but Verity cut in. "I don't get why it's such a big deal. You've got magic knowledge in your head, right? And you're not nuts. So what's the problem?" William nearly laughed at the orc's bluntness. Verity, unlike the noble-born elves, hadn't grown up with the same fear of harrowing. To her, it was just another oddity in a world full of them. "Well," William said, "let's just say I'm an exception to the rule. Not as many exceptions as I'd like, but enough to keep me functional." Marlene raised an eyebrow. "And why tell us now?" "Because people outside our group are going to start accusing me of it soon," William explained. "The things I've created, artificial cores, etherless weapons, explosives that don't require enchanting, they're going to raise questions. By tomorrow morning, the cat will be out of the bag. And there will be those who'll use my harrowed status as an excuse to lock me away." He glanced around to ensure no crew members were eavesdropping. "Legal precedent exists for institutionalizing harrowed individuals. If I'm locked up, my territory goes back to the crown. Yelena would get everything, my facilities, my workforce, and me under lock and key. She'd do it in a heartbeat if she thought she could get away with it." Originally, he'd planned to reveal his true capabilities after securing the Summerfield Duchy through marriage to the twins. As a ducal consort, he'd have been untouchable. But plans had a way of unraveling. Still, this situation wasn't entirely terrible. If he could save the capital from this attack, Yelena wouldn't dare move against him. The people's trust would be too valuable to squander on opportunism. "But," William continued, In the coming days, people will approach you. They'll ask for insights into my character, hoping you'll speak out against me. I need to know where you stand. Marlene was the first to respond. I swore an oath to aid you, and I meant it. My family stands with you as well. Verity nodded firmly. You gave my family a home. The harrowed thing doesn't bother me. You've got void knowledge, but you're not crazy. That's good enough for me. William smiled, grateful for their support. Then he turned to Alzenia, who looked conflicted. She sighed. Fine. I think you're nuts, but no one outside this team will hear that from me. Not when I'm about to captain the ship that saved the capital. Plus, I've already picked out a plot of land on your rocky dirt heap. I'm not giving that up. William's grin widened. Thank you, Alzenia. Your support means a lot. Before she could respond, a bridge officer approached. Report from Inirka, my lord. The enemy has shifted an airship into a defensive position above their fleet. They're deploying troops onto the shielded airships via parachute. William froze. What? The scene shifted to Okol, an Orcish mage, gliding through the air toward an enemy airship. The wind whistled past her ears as she activated the ether thrusters in her boots and palms, slowing her descent just enough to land safely. She rolled to disperse her momentum, then sprang into action. A slaver on deck barely had time to shout before Okol's axe found its mark. The orc didn't wait, spraying the nearby pivot gun crew with bolts from her bow. Around her, other Orcish mages landed, swiftly dispatching the enemy. As Okol moved toward the ship's interior, she encountered a group of chained prisoners, humans and dwarves, not orcs as expected. Her plan to recruit them as new sisters for the cause was complicated by their presence. Before she could decide what to do, an elven overseer emerged, hurling a lightning bolt that killed several prisoners. Okol dove for cover, chanting a spell, but the elf was faster. Just as the orc prepared to fire her bow, a human prisoner stabbed the elf with a ramrod, disrupting her spell. Okol didn't hesitate. Her ice shard and bolts finished the elf. She tossed the keys to the prisoners. Unlock yourselves, but stay back. Others from my tribe are coming. You don't want them to mistake you for enemies. With that, she descended into the ship's bowels, leaving the humans to their fate. She had a ship to clear, and the question of what to do with the prisoners would have to wait. Okol moved swiftly through the narrow corridors of the airship, the sounds of battle echoing all around her. Her fellow Orcish mages were engaged in fierce combat in every corner of the vessel. The air was thick with the smell of blood and smoke, and the screams of pain and anger mixed with the distant rumble of explosions. When she reached the command center, she found it heavily guarded. A group of elven sailors and human mercenaries stood ready, their weapons drawn. Okol didn't hesitate. She charged forward, her axe gleaming in the dim light. The first elf fell before he could react, his throat slit cleanly. The others scrambled to defend themselves, but Okol was a whirlwind of motion, her movements precise and deadly. Behind her, more Orcish warriors poured into the room, their battle cries filling the air. The defenders were quickly overwhelmed, their bodies falling to the ground as the orcs pressed their advantage. Within moments, the command center was theirs. Okol glanced around, taking in the control panels and maps scattered across the room. Secure the area, she ordered. We need to disable this ship before reinforcements arrive. As her warriors set to work, Okol turned her attention to the prisoners they had encountered earlier. The humans and dwarves were huddled together, their faces a mix of fear and hope. Okol approached them, her expression stern but not unkind. You have two choices, she said, her voice firm. You can stay here and take your chances with the enemy, or you can come with us. But if you choose to follow, you'll have to fight. We don't have room for dead weight. The prisoners exchanged nervous glances before one of them, a young woman with fiery red hair, stepped forward. We'll fight, she said, her voice steady. We've got nothing left to lose. Okol nodded, a hint of respect in her eyes. Good. Arm yourselves and stay close. We're not out of this yet. Back aboard the Jellyfish, William was deep in thought. The reports from the battlefield were coming in fast, and the situation was becoming increasingly dire. The enemy had deployed troops onto their airships, and the fighting was intense. He knew they needed to act quickly if they were to turn the tide. "Captain Nornhell," he said, turning to the woman at the helm, "we need to launch the Academy's shards. If we can get them into the air, they can support our corsairs and take out the enemy fleet." The captain nodded, her expression grim. "It's risky, but it's our best shot. I'll give the order." As the captain relayed the command, William turned to his team. "This is it," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We've got one chance to end this. Let's make it count." Marlene, Verity, and Alzenia exchanged determined glances. They knew the stakes and they were ready to fight. Together, they moved to their stations, preparing for the final push. In the skies above the city, the Academy's shards began to launch, their sleek forms cutting through the air like knives. The enemy fleet, already battered and disorganized, was caught off guard by the sudden assault. The shards moved with precision, their weapons tearing through the enemy ships with deadly accuracy. On the ground, William watched the battle unfold, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew this was their moment. If they could hold out just a little longer, they could win. As the last of the enemy ships fell from the sky, a cheer went up from the defenders. The battle was over. They had won. But William knew the war was far from finished. The Draculite Empire would not take this defeat lightly, and they would be back. For now, though, they had bought themselves some time. In the aftermath of the battle, the city began to rebuild. The survivors tended to their wounded and mourned their dead. But there was also a sense of hope. They had faced the enemy and emerged victorious. William stood on the deck of the Jellyfish, looking out over the city. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was ready. He had his team by his side, and together they would face whatever came next. As the sun set on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the battlefield, William allowed himself a small smile. They had fought hard and they had won. For now, that was enough.